The courtroom was packed, attention hanging in the air thick enough to cut with a knife. Ohio Senator JD Vance had taken a bold step by appearing in person to testify in a high-profile case involving judicial misconduct, a rare and dramatic move that stunned political circles. The defendant, a mid-level state contractor accused of embezzlement, was not what drew the attention of the national media. Rather, it was the judge overseeing the trial, Judge Ronald M. Kessler, a notoriously combative figure whose record had already raised eyebrows. Known for his arrogant demeanor and suspected of wielding his gavel for personal gain, Judge Kessler had managed to maintain his robe despite multiple ethics complaints over the years. Vance's presence was a lightning rod. As soon as he stepped up to the witness stand, murmurs rippled through the courtroom. The judge leaned forward with a sneer, eyebrows arched as if amused by the very idea of a U.S. senator addressing his courtroom. "Well, look what the cat dragged in," Kessler said, not even attempting to hide the contempt in his voice. "I suppose the Senate must be on recess, or they're handing out participation trophies these days." Gasps erupted from the crowd, but Vance remained composed, looking directly at the judge. He was there to speak not just for the case but against the very rot he believed Kessler represented: a abuse of authority, personal vendettas, and the decay of trust in the judiciary. He began detailing incidents involving the judge's past rulings that seemed riddled with conflicts of interest, including one case where the judge's brother-in-law's company was mysteriously awarded a lucrative city contract after a ruling that conveniently removed legal obstacles. Kessler interrupted often, objecting to Vance's testimony even when no objection was warranted, his face reddening by the minute. At one point, he slammed his gavel so hard that the sound echoed like a gunshot, silencing the room. "This is my courtroom," he roared. "Not the stage for some grandstanding populist senator." Vance simply raised an eyebrow. "And yet justice doesn't seem to reside here." Kessler's eyes blazed. The prosecutor hesitated but allowed Vance to proceed. The senator continued describing whistleblower accounts, shredded evidence, and court transcripts with suspicious redactions. Journalists scribbled furiously. Cameras clicked. Kessler appeared increasingly unhinged. His disdain turned to personal attacks, calling Vance a hillbilly mouthpiece and accusing him of trying to manufacture relevance. "Are you sure you're not lost, Senator?" he hissed. "Because this isn't a campaign stop. This is a court of law, something you clearly know nothing about." The room was frozen. Vance didn't respond with anger. He simply laid down a piece of paper, a subpoena request that had been previously denied without explanation, and looked at the judge. "This was quashed without legal rationale. The witness is your financial advisor." A dead silence fell over the courtroom. For a moment, even Judge Kessler looked rattled. Things unraveled quickly from that point. The courtroom spectators, previously stunned into silence by the judge's bombastic performance, were now leaning forward with riveted attention. The defense attorney, a cautious man known for avoiding political minefields, slowly stood and requested an immediate recess, citing an escalating breakdown in judicial impartiality. But Judge Kessler, face flushed, refused. "We are proceeding," he said sharply. "This is nothing but a farce." JD Vance sat calmly, his eyes locked on Kessler. "There's no farce here, Your Honor. Just facts." The tension escalated as Vance's legal team entered into evidence several financial statements linked to offshore accounts under the names of various shell companies. They were tied back to municipal contracts that had passed through Kessler's courtroom. The judge attempted to shout down the presentation, demanding the documents be stricken from the record. "None of this is admissible," he bellowed, but the prosecutor raised an eyebrow. "On what grounds, Your Honor?" Kessler faltered. A visible pause. "Irrelevant," he finally muttered. The prosecutor pressed on. "With all due respect, we have a sitting U.S. Senator detailing a pattern of corruption, and Your Honor's refusals to admit relevant documents are suspicious." The room buzzed with murmurs. One of the jurors leaned forward, visibly shaken. Suddenly, a man in a gray suit walked in from the side door. A U.S. Marshal Gregory Hunt, flanked by two plainclothes federal agents. The marshals approached the bench with quiet but firm resolve. The judge's eyes widened as Hunt handed him a folder. "What is this?" he demanded. "It's a sealed federal warrant," Hunt interrupted. "We're executing it now." For a moment, nobody moved. Kessler looked around, incredulous. as if waiting for someone to intervene on his behalf. "I am a sitting judge," he shouted. "This is outrageous." The marshal remained composed. "That won't stop us, Your Honor." "Not anymore." Cameras flashed, phones recorded. JD Vance said nothing, merely watching as events unfolded. The warrant detailed charges of bribery, racketeering, obstruction of justice, and conspiracy. More shockingly, it revealed that federal investigators had been monitoring Kessler's courtroom for months, and Vance's appearance had been the final test, a way to draw the judge out publicly, forcing him to react in front of an audience. His contemptuous treatment of a federal legislator had triggered an ethics emergency hearing, convened in secret just hours before the court session began. "You think you can do this to me?" Kessler barked, rising to his feet. "This is political persecution." The agents didn't flinch. "No sir, this is accountability." They placed him in handcuffs. The gavel he had clutched so defiantly slipped from his grasp and clattered to the floor, the sound like a closing door echoing through the chamber. Outside the courthouse, the crowd had grown. Word spread like wildfire, first whispers on social media, then local news alerts, and finally national broadcasts. Protesters and supporters alike gathered outside the building in stunned disbelief, chanting slogans or holding signs. Some called Kessler a tyrant who finally got what was coming to him, while others, who saw the judge as a crusader against what they called government overreach, shouted conspiracy theories and blamed the arrest on political machinations. JD Vance emerged from the courthouse to a frenzy of microphones and reporters. He looked tired but resolute, not triumphantly political but profoundly concerned. "This is not a day for celebration," he said plainly. "It's a day to reflect on how dangerously close we are to losing public faith in our institutions." When asked if he had orchestrated the judge's arrest, he shook his head. "I'm not the law. I simply pointed to where the rot had set in. It's the duty of our justice system to remove it." The arrest sent shockwaves through the legal and political world. Within hours, state and federal agencies were reopening dozens of cases Kessler had presided over. Defense attorneys filed motions citing bias and misconduct, and appeals courts prepared for a flood of filings. In Columbus, emergency meetings were convened by the State Bar Association. Multiple senior judges issued statements urging calm and promising swift action to preserve judicial integrity. Meanwhile, Kessler's home was raided, and investigators seized computers, ledgers, and documents. Among them was a handwritten notebook that detailed various financial dealings, including initials and dates. JTV appeared several times in the margins and notes apparently referring to JD Vance, though investigators later confirmed they were attempts to monitor and undermine the senator's political moves. Kessler had been waging a quiet war against what he viewed as threats to his control, and Vance had become a primary target. Even more damning was video surveillance footage from a country club where Kessler was seen meeting with city contractors in clear violation of judicial ethics. Transcripts of those meetings, obtained from wiretaps, showed him promising favorable rulings in exchange for future considerations. The scandal ballooned overnight. Congress announced a bipartisan inquiry into judicial oversight systems. The Department of Justice opened a special investigation, while watchdog groups demanded reforms to prevent such abuse in the future. Across the political spectrum, reactions vary either from outrage to embarrassment to opportunism. Some tried to claim credit for the judge's downfall, others sought to distance themselves from past associations. JD Vance, however, stayed relatively quiet in the days following the arrest. He made one televised address to his constituents. "This wasn't about me. This was about power abused behind the shield of the law. We must be vigilant, or we risk becoming governed not by justice, but by those who manipulate it." In the following weeks, the impact of the scandal continued to ripple across Ohio and beyond. Judge Kessler, once a feared figure in legal circles, now sat in a federal detention center awaiting trial, denied bail due to the overwhelming nature of the charges and the potential flight risk. Investigators uncovered a vast web of corruption, contracts awarded to friends, rulings exchanged for campaign donations, evidence tampered with and testimonies buried. The depth of the rot shocked even veteran prosecutors. Whistleblowers who had been silenced for years came forward, revealing how Kessler's courtroom had become a theater of injustice where outcomes were bought and sold. One former clerk testified anonymously about shredding files on the judge's orders. Another revealed how defense attorneys were quietly warned not to challenge the judge too aggressively or risk sanctions or worse. Meanwhile, JD Vance was thrust further into the national spotlight. Though he had no formal role in the prosecution, his moral stance and refusal to back down had turned him into a symbol of resistance against institutional decay. Polls showed a sudden surge in approval ratings across party lines. Editorials in newspapers from New York to Los Angeles hailed the moment as a rare victory for transparency. But not everyone was pleased. Certain political operatives began whispering that Vance was using the scandal to propel a future presidential bid, a notion he denied firmly. "If defending justice is political, then we've lost our way," he said in one interview. Still, the speculation persisted. A documentary team began chronicling the saga, tracing how one judge's downfall sparked a reckoning with unchecked judicial power. Courtrooms across the country faced renewed scrutiny. Judges in several states were audited, and some quietly retired before inquiries could begin. A national task force was formed, aimed at creating new accountability mechanisms, including citizen oversight panels and high-powered analytics to detect patterns of judicial bias. The legacy of the case lived on. Years later, law schools would teach the trial as a pivotal moment in modern judicial history. As for Judge Kessler, he was eventually convicted on all counts. He was sentenced to 47 years in federal prison. In his final statement before sentencing, he showed no remorse. "I did what was necessary to keep order," he said. "If that makes me a villain, so be it." The judge presiding over his sentencing did not offer a rebuke, only a quiet nod. "You were entrusted with justice, and you betrayed it." As he was led away, his former courtroom, once a place of fear, was converted into a civic education center for young law students. JD Vance would occasionally return there, not to relive the moment, but to remind future leaders of the thin line between justice and tyranny, and how easily that line can blur when good people remain silent.